All right, let's get started.
All right.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for those of us that are visiting us in the NFT Boutique verse, which there's no one yet. And
We're
are
all
here
here
in the NFT Boutique for our Web3 Women nights. This is Sandra Ponce de Leon, and I'm coming to you live from the NFT Boutique in Tulum, and we're really excited to have Don Jerez here, who is going to present to us about Philosopher Democracies and how we can improve our wisdom building for community self-governance. So, very excited. Gracias, Don. I'm going to let you have at it.
Thank you. Yes. Welcome. Philosopher Democracies is just a culmination of a number of bits and pieces that come under the umbrella called the Liberty of Democracies. So there's nothing here that is new. I don't do anything new because if I do things new, then I don't know how effective they're going to be. I have to spend years testing it. I don't have time for that. The world doesn't have time for that. I prefer to use bits and pieces that already exist, already have a proven track record, and I just use those pieces. So everything you're going to see here is open source. It's not something I charge for. It's not something that I sell because I can't and I have no interest in. I just see the value in helping to get the world to understand that it can fix itself. I'm not here to fix the world. It's too big. It's too complex. I have not the capacities to do it personally. But what I can do and what small groups of people can do is they can actually use processes that already exist to fix themselves as a planet and as a people. So that's my focus. I call this Philosopher Democracies because it's an answer to Plato's idea, as he wrote in the Republic, of the idea of what's called a philosopher king. The idea of the philosopher king is that in order to break the cycle of constantly failing types of government, from monarchies to republics, which usually evolve into oligarchies, which we're going through right now. WEF and the rest of that, those are all our oligarchs that are coming into power and starting to assert themselves because the democracies and the republics are failing under that weight of the oligarchs. So it goes to an oligarchy. Oligarchs tend to be fairly competitive, so they kill each other off until you get one. Then you have a dictatorship, and that dictatorship gets very powerful, crowns himself king, and eventually you're back into a monarchy. So that closes the cycle of governmental change. And that was written about in the Republic 500 years before Christ, 500 BC. So they'd already gone through that cycle multiple times, and we just keep doing the same cycles all the time. So Socrates, who Plato was writing about, his teacher, was having an argument and a discussion with a friend of his, and was saying, how do you break that cycle? What causes that cycle to stop being a cycle? And because Socrates liked the idea of kings, because they can just get things done, right? Unlike messy democracies and republics, he preferred to work with the idea of a king. And he said, what we need is a philosopher king. We need a person of royal blood, very young age, to be bathed in the philosophies. Because the philosophies ultimately teach you two things, among many other things, but they teach you two primary things. Number one, all humans are self-interested. Not a surprise. Very easy to understand, but it really embeds that idea. If you study the philosophies long enough, you also come across the idea of what's called mutual self-interest. The idea that our self-interest is best served in helping others and elevating others, because no person is an island, and we rely on others' well-being to help us. And so a king that really understands that, because he's been taught that his entire life, will never disrespect his people, because that's how monarchies fail. They start to disrespect their people, they tax them too much, they treat them as inhuman beings, and sooner or later those people rise up against them and overthrow them. So the philosopher king will never do that, because he understands the concept of mutual self-interest, that his well-being is embedded in the well-being of his people, so he doesn't cause them to be have bad lives. So it's a great idea on paper, and I kept thinking about it, and I said, it's okay, except for the fact that it is still based on the philosopher king, and the king is a central point of failure. So if the king gets assassinated or goes insane, or so many other ways that system could fail. So I thought, what we really need is not a philosopher king, but a philosophizing population. We need the whole population to understand the concept of mutual self-interest. We've lost that. That's why we're so polarized and so against each other, because we feel that we can stand on our own. But the truth is, we need each other. We absolutely need each other to do extremely well. So we need that philosophizing population. So how do we get there, and why do we get there? Well, that's what Philosopher Democracies is all about, and I'm hijacking the term PhD because I can. It's a term that's lost its value quite a bit, because we've seen a lot of people with PhDs do not so well in the last few years, especially. So, oops, see that?
I can move it for you.
Yeah.
Challenging subject.
Next slide.
Next slide,
There
yes.
Oh, there you go. You got it. Thank you. Okay. So this, and when you're studying philosophies, really the whole point of philosophies is to become wiser. And why do we need to be wiser? Well, this quote really says it all. This quote.
Sorry. Oh no.
The Pink Panther quote. Good autumn. Does your dog bat? We'll get there sooner or later.
It's the metaverse. Sometimes you get lost in the metaverse.
Well, what I can do is I can actually read the quote while it's being pulled up here. Because
There we go. Okay.
almost. Can we get to it here? Here we go. Oh, and you've got it there. So I want to read it there. No society wants you to become wise. It is against the investment of all societies, not some societies, all societies. If people are wise, they cannot be exploited. If they are intelligent, they cannot be subjugated. They cannot be forced into a mechanical life to live like robots. They will have the fragrance of rebellion around them. In fact, a wise person is a fire, a light, a flame. He would rather die than be enslaved. And that quote is by Osho. It's kind of cut off there, but it's by Osho. Regardless of who said it, some people like Osho, some people don't. I don't care. The logic is there. The reality is there. That wisdom, any system that we employ to make the world a better place, has to involve wisdom. It needs to. Not just intelligence. It has to be about wisdom. Because wisdom is a very special thing. And that's why societies don't want you to become wise. Because wise people are creative, and creative people change things. And society does not want to change. It resists change. And so it resists wise people, and it resists.
It wants the people that are just going to accept everything and go along with the plan.
When humans create systems, whatever they are, through companies, corporations, organizations, governments, whatever, when we create these things, those systems tend to protect themselves, because if they don't protect themselves, they'll fall pretty quick to whatever alternates there are. So they do learn to protect themselves. And the best way that most systems protect themselves in our system is that they don't have to be hidden. They just have to be not talked about. That's enough to fall down the memory hole and people forget. And if there is one flaw with humanity, it's that we forget. We have short memories. And so we do need those reminders to keep our defenses up. So it is about wisdom.
Next slide.
Yeah. If it's near the, I got it. I think I see it now. Right there.
Close.
There
Yeah.
it
Oh,
is.
there you go. Yeah, I got it.
There we go. Perfect. Okay. 30 years ago, I asked myself a question I couldn't answer, and I love questions I can't answer because then I have to deep dive, right? You got to figure out what is it? What am I missing? So I asked that question that I asked myself was, why as a species can we not solve our fundamental problems? Why can't we solve poverty and inequity and conflict and all the things we go through year after year after year? Something is preventing us, because the premise being that we are quite intelligent as a species. We do stupid shit all the time, granted, but we also do incredibly thoughtful, complex solutions on a regular basis. So we're missing something. Something's preventing us from figuring out the solutions. So what is that? So I looked at every problem I could. I looked at the source of those problems. I looked at the source that caused the source of those problems, and I just kept going up the chain until all problems that I could follow all came up to two source problems that cause all the other problems. So there's an analogy I like to use, is that we spend our time, so much of our time as people who really want to change the world, we spend our time pulling turds out of the stream, right, trying to fix the world. The problem is that those turds keep coming every year. We pour billions, trillions of dollars into fixing them. We pour our own valuable time, millions of hours into trying to fix those problems. And they just never seem to stop. It doesn't matter how hard we try. Why? Because we're not going upstream to find out who's putting the turds in the stream. And until you do that, you're just going to spend the rest of your life pulling the turds. So we have to go to the source of problems. And what are the sources? Well, every single problem I could find always led to number one, the debt-based monetary system. The idea that creating a unit of currency with a debt is one of the most insane, most evil systems that humans have ever devised. So much so that every theological book in the world, doesn't matter if it's the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, it doesn't matter, they all warn against that kind of system. Because anytime that system gets employed, society always ends up crumbling, and there's always mass pain and suffering in those societies. Because it's a system that guarantees poverty. You cannot solve poverty as long as that system exists. So all these people who are trying to solve poverty are just spinning their wheels. They have some successes, but they always ultimately fail. Because the debt-based monetary system will always guarantee that you always have losers in that system, because there will never be enough money in the system, because every single unit of currency comes with a debt. Well, that means there's never a unit of currency to pay that debt. You can create more currencies to pay the old debt, but they come with their own debt. It's a hole you can never fill. That's insane. Absolutely insane. But that's the system we keep living under. So that has to change. The good thing is that to change it is quite easy, and that is you need a credit-based monetary system. It just means you create money without debt. That's it. It's super, super simple. And so when I realized that, I went and studied the over 4,000 alternative currencies that existed around the world 8 years before Bitcoin came along. And they were great. They work. They had some scaling issues. There's little tweaks that have to be done. But for the most part, it's a functional system. So much so, there was one in South America that actually covered 4 countries. It started because of the failure of the Argentinian peso back in the 90s.
What's that one called?
I think it has the name red in it, but I can't remember. I gotta go back and check. But it covered Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay. Right? Not all of it, but there were groups all over those countries that were using it. And I think it's still active today. I didn't get a chance to double check that, but I should. But regardless, it just shows that we could solve so many of those issues so quickly if we just use credit-based money systems. Now, before Bitcoin, it was hard to distribute on a large scale because it was all done manually. Often it was done with volunteer labor, which never scales. So that's problematic. Bitcoin comes along and solves 80% of that, because it gives us the recipe to create credit-based money anytime we want. So now we've got 20,000 credit-based money systems around the world. But we haven't solved the debt-based monetary problem. Why? Because the last 20% is still unsolved, and it needs to be solved. And it has to do with who creates the money. Bitcoin did a really good job at giving us credit-based money like that. We can create them on the fly, but who creates it is the key, right? Bitcoin itself was either an individual or a small group of people. We don't know, but it doesn't matter. Of the 20,000 altcoins that are out there, they're usually created by one of four groups. They're either done by an individual, a group, a small group of people, a company, or an organization. But that's not what money is for. Money is supposed to be used to track productivity in society, in communities. So really, who needs to create the money is the communities. And none of these 20,000 alternative currencies are doing that. So we still have that 20% to solve. We're coming to that. The second biggest problem in the world is hierarchical governance. The idea that we need leaders and politicians when we absolutely do not. There's no actual need to have leaders and politicians. In fact, the fact that we call them leaders to begin with, they're not our leaders. We hired them to manage our societies. That doesn't make them a leader. If I start a business and I got a cashier, do I spend my whole day going, oh, you're my leader? No. I hired you to do a job, and if you're not doing it right, then I got to get on top of it, right? I got to get in there and either tell you you're going to be fired or dock your pay or whatever I have to do to get it back. Well, why aren't we doing that with our politicians? When they screw up, we just go, oh, well, I guess we don't have the power to do anything. It's completely untrue. We have to rethink all of this. These are our employees. We need to start kicking butt. Or, better yet, bypass them. There's no reason we need to put up with that at all. Right? Just say, get the hell out. We're going to deal with this ourselves. Right? So we need the answer to hierarchical governance. The answer is non-hierarchical governance, where communities come in, step in, and actually make decisions for themselves. So I study all the various different formats of non-hierarchical government, and there's tons of them, but all the best ones, the ones that actually instill wisdom in the process, all come under the umbrella term of deliberative democracies, which was coined by James Fishkin of Stanford University, and it shows that there are processes that build wisdom in that process. And so communities under those processes can make very high quality decisions. They're not just opinion bashing. You see, our system doesn't make us wise, so all we do all day is bash opinions. It doesn't matter if it's social media, mass media, schooling, everywhere. We're mostly bashing opinions. We get an opinion, we just hold on to that opinion and bash it against other people. We hold a referendum. That's the government asking for your opinion. That's it, because you haven't really studied it. You don't really understand all the possible perspectives of that issue. So we just have an opinion, and my opinion is going to cause me to vote one way, and somebody else's opinion is going to cause them to vote another way. And those opinions are very manipulatable, especially in the media. You go back to Cambridge Analytica and all the other stuff where we see opinions being manipulated all day, every day. So that's not a good way to run society. And that doesn't make us ready to choose our own paths because we aren't wise yet. But we can get wise. We just need process. Now, we don't have examples of that process anywhere. That's the problem. Well, we do, but we have to do some digging to find it, and that's what I did. So we need non-hierarchical governance. And how do we do that? Let's look at the mechanics that. Oh, no, there it is. Just takes a bit to fly.
Yeah.
It disappears and doesn't come back. Hello. Oh, okay. So process requires political autonomy, where we make those wise decisions, which requires research, consultation, and deliberation. Okay? We need to do this as a united community. And we need to be very transparent, very clear, and fully participatory. If the community is going to make a decision, it has to do so as an entire community. whatever that community is, whether it's a small village, an entire city, an entire state or province, or an entire country. Technically, even the world could be a community. But there's certain perspectives where that will come through. The best bet is once we have that political autonomy, we can start getting economic autonomy. We can solve that last 20%, which would be brilliant. And we can do so with what are called community currencies, where the community wiser, and the way you become wiser is you really understand all aspects of certain issues. So, wisdom building. So what is wisdom? We need to define wisdom to understand how to apply to wisdom. If we're going to instill wisdom on average everyday people off the street, we need to know a very specific process. So what is that process? Well, first of all, we need that definition. And the best definition of wisdom that I've come across, and I looked at quite a few of them, but the best one I found was one that said that wisdom is a psychological human trait that is composed of two components. The first component is insatiable curiosity. Okay? A wise person just wants to learn and learn and learn and learn and never stop learning. But that in itself is not a full definition of wisdom because it also describes intellectualism. An intellectual wants to learn and learn and learn, but many intellectuals are not wise. And we've just seen that in the last 3 years. We saw a whole bunch of intellectuals fall flat on their face because they just did not have the wisdom. So we need the other part of what brings wisdom. Not just insatiable curiosity, but humility. Humbleness. A properly wise person says, even though I know so much information and I'm still learning more information, any piece of information I have can be wrong.
Ability to be wrong, yeah.
And I have to be prepared to be wrong. I have to constantly review my information. As I get new information, I gotta see, does what I already know hold up to that? That's real wisdom. So we have to be prepared to be wrong. But how do you do that with opinionated people? Well, because we're all opinionated. Even myself, we all hold opinions, but we got to break past the opinions to the wisdom level. Well, how you do that is there's a very interesting study called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect, Dunning and Kruger, what they did is they formulated this great little experiment where they took average everyday people off the street. They taught them on a subject. Didn't matter what the subject was, but they found each different group would have a different subject. But they would teach them on a certain subject for 20 to 30 minutes. And once they finished that teaching, they would have a test. And on that test, buried in the test, is a question that said, how much do you think you know about the subject? And most people would say 80 to 90%. Okay, so they would bring them back and they would teach them for another 3 to 4 hours on the subject, far more than they first got. And then they were tested again and they were asked, how much do you think you know about the subject? And most people would say 20 to 30%. Why? Because they became humble. Because they realized their opinion was not what they thought it was, that it didn't hold up to the old and new information. And that they have to now be cautious, they have to be careful, they have to be humble. There's where you can instill wisdom in the population. So, taking that same idea, this is what this process does. It's a 3-phase process. Each one is of equal intervals. And you have phase 1, which is you bring in the top experts on the subject that you want to teach, or that you're dealing with. Right? So find out what issue the community is dealing with. If it's road problems, as Tulum has many of them. If it's water problems, which Tulum has many of, electrical problems, and you can just go through the list.
Which
right?
Tulum has many of.
Which Tulum has many of, and many communities do. Right? That's the thing. There's never any kind of community that has no problems. You just got to find out what are the worst ones, what they want to deal with right away, which the government is not properly dealing with. If the government's dealing with it in a good fashion, then let it deal with it in a good fashion. If the government's collecting garbage well, let it collect garbage well. I got no problem with that. But as soon as the government's not dealing with a certain issue properly or at all, then it's the right of the community to come in and step in and say, no, we're going to take over here because obviously this cashier cannot do his job, right? So it's time to take over. And just voting in new cashiers is just not going to make it work. You know your business, you live in the community, it's up to us to deal with it. So, bring in the top experts, and not only do you teach them, but you teach them to the point where they become authoritative on the subject. Any one of the people that you bring into this process, and you do it through random selection, that's the best way to do it. Because you can't shove, in the case of Tulum, you can't shove 50,000 people into a room and teach 50,000 people to that level. It's cost prohibitive and a whole bunch of other issues. But what you can do is you can take a random selection from the population. The technical term is sortition. If you take that random selection from the population, it's got to be enough people that you get a good cross-section of voices from the community, right? So you old, young, rich, poor, employed, unemployed, it doesn't matter. But you get that nice cross-section of voices. So that really, truly is somewhat representative of the community. So I would say probably not best to go below, say, 50 people. Okay? Because it always depends on the size of the community, the complexity of the community, and the complexity of the issue. But somewhere in there you'll find your comfort zone. So I would say I would not want to go lower than 50, and I would not want to go above, say, 150 or 200 people. Because then it starts becoming unwieldy to try to train that many people. So you hit a certain top limit, you have a certain bottom limit, and you work within it. So once you've got that randomly selected group, you teach them to the point where they can speak authoritatively on the subject. So if they're approached by their friends and neighbors, by politicians, by the media, by university professors, they can hold their own. They can say, well, the stats say this, the facts and figures are these, this has been done in this region, in that region. They can really hold their own in the discussion, but they're prepared to be wrong. They're listening as well. They're saying, my understanding is we've had 30% of this happening here, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you're saying it's more like 50%. Okay, well, I'll certainly look that up. I want to make sure that I'm right on it. But they're prepared to be wrong. Right? So now they're wiser, they're listening, but they also can hold their own on that and have a really good, thoughtful, thorough discussion. Once you've gotten past the expert consultation, you go into the second phase, which is public consultations. Now you bring the community in to speak on the issue. Anybody in the community can come and speak. Now they've had access to what the expert said, so they speak on topic directly to what the experts said. But the reason you do this is because the experts know expert information, but they do not know community. They don't know the flavor of the community, the details of how it functions. That has to come from the community. So now this discovery group, the group that you put through this process, they've got all the expert information, all the community member information. Now they go into deliberations. That's the third phase. So now they argue from their own points of view, because they have different points of view from other members of the community, but they all try to come to a consensus based on all the information that they have and their own point of view. Once they've come to a solution, and that solution must be fleshed out, it's going to have timelines, budgets, everything. Once they come up to a solution, here's the important part. They don't get to decide because they are a subset of the community. As a subset, just like any politician, they could be threatened, they could be bribed, they could be cajoled, they could have internal biases that don't represent the community. We're randomly selected. So what they do get to do is they publish. They publish their findings and their proposal to go forward to the entire community. Now the community gets this published document. Now they can read through it and they can say, oh, this is what the experts said, this is what we said as a community, this is how they came to their solution, right? Show your homework. Right? So that all gets published, they read through it, now they're prepared to make a proper decision. Because now they have a fully transparent, fully documented process that now goes to referendum for the whole community. And that's how you get the completed participation of everybody in the community. They hold that referendum. If the referendum fails, that's a good thing, because obviously whatever the solution was did not resonate with the community. So it should fail. But even though it fails, they still learn. They learn so much more. They got all that extra wisdom they didn't have before, and that got transferred in the document. So that's a bonus. There you go. But if it passes, this is where it gets really interesting, because if it passes after a clear, transparent, fully documented, fully participatory process, no single politician can stand against the result because he's lost his mandate on the subject. Right? And that's powerful, because now the community can bypass the cashier that doesn't do his job properly. Right? Who will make their own decisions within just a few months, compared to the years sometimes we wait for government to deal with things. So now, once that's done, then they can move on to the next issue and the next issue. In fact, because you're involving the entire community and you've got a huge source of people to deal with all these issues, you could start running these in parallel. You could be solving 5 problems at a time, 20 problems at a time. You just have these random selections and go through each issue, and boom, boom, boom.
How do you teach humility to the ones that aren't ready to have that lesson yet?
Because you've got to break the opinion barrier, as in the Dunning-Kruger effect. You've got to teach them to the point where they realize that
They
what they
don't know
thought they
anything.
knew was just not enough. Because obviously they don't really understand all of the facets of the problem. And believe me, it changes people dramatically. I had the pleasure of actually going through one of these processes, because while I was studying this, it was announced that a citizens' assembly would be held in my backyard in British Columbia for the 5 million people of British Columbia. So that proves the scalability. Right?
Using this process.
Using a very similar process to this, yeah. Literally talk about the universe just throwing something at you while you're in the middle of studying it, right? So I was doing a radio show for CHOR Radio at the time, and I said, oh my God, I got to get on this, because this is exactly what I'm looking at. So I got my press pass, and I started going to the random selection meetings. So I started interviewing people as they were selected. I interviewed them halfway through the process and at the end of the process. I also interviewed the chairman of the process, who was Jack Delaney, who was president of Simon Fraser University at the time. So he was selected to chair the whole process. I also interviewed members of the public, members of the media class, and members of the political class, because I wanted to get a good overall view of how everybody saw this. I also interviewed the participants a year after the process, because I wanted to see if there were any lasting effects to the process. So here's what came out of all those interviews, which is very interesting. First of all, the media class and the political class all said exactly the same thing. It was stunning. It was like they were reading from a script, but they weren't. This is just how they view people in general. And what they said was, this system will fail. It will fail within the first month or two, because people will come, they'll get bored, and they'll stop coming. That's how they see us, right? So what actually happened is, this was a year-long process. They worked on weekends, so they worked their main jobs during the week. Year-long process, so that each phase was 4 months, 4 months, 4 months, 4 months. 160 people randomly selected to go through this process. And they were randomly selected. Literally, they would call a person from the audience, put their hand in a hat, and pull out a name. And then another person was asked to pull out another name, and another person. So it's unless somebody was super good at sleight of hand, they were randomized. And the people who were selected were very random people. Everything from doctors, lawyers, all the way down to babysitters and unemployed people. It was just a complete cross-section of the population. So that was brilliant. And point of note, 160 people, year-long process, only 2 people dropped out.
Wow.
The whole process. That's a retention amount that I've never seen in
Yeah.
any other process, right?
Yeah.
And those two people, by the way, dropped out reluctantly. They said, we really didn't want to go. This was so excellent. But they dropped out because of family emergencies, right? They said, we have to go, we just don't have a choice. So that was an amazing retention rate. So when I interviewed the people at the beginning of the process, I asked them, what do you think about the process? What do you think, how effective do you think it's going to be? And everybody basically just said, don't know if it's going to be good, never heard of anything like this before, but willing to try it. Okay. Halfway through the process, completely different answers. They were saying things like, this was the most amazing thing we had ever done in our lives.
Wow.
Not. They said they were just riveted, they were having such a good time, they thought they really had to think about it because there was so much information crammed into that 4 months, but they really learned, they really understood it, and they could hold their own. I heard them talking to other reporters, talking to other politicians. They held their own in their arguments. They said, well, what about this? What about that? But they were also prepared to be wrong. They came across information they weren't aware of. They would accept that information and double check it to make sure. But they were wiser. All 160 of them. It was stunning to watch. So that was that. Now I'm going to skip the last interviews at the end of the process. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to jump to a year later because something very interesting happened then and also happened at the end of the process. And so the year later, I was trying to figure out if there was any lasting effects to this whole thing. So I asked them the first initial questions, what do you still think about the process? They would say, yeah, absolutely, one of the best things we ever did in our lives. So, okay, good, and would you like to go through it again? I said, it should be a regular thing, absolutely. It never was, unfortunately. And then I said, okay, is your life different in any way at this point than before you took this process? And the kind of amalgamated answer was, yeah. Before this process, we used to come home, feed the kids, watch TV, maybe go out for ice cream or a game or something like this. And that was our lives, day after day after day after day. So, okay, so what's different now? The general answer was, at least 2 or 3 times a week, we're out in the community doing stuff because this process taught us that nothing gets done until we do it. Oh my freaking God. This is average everyday people that, every politician would say are just apathetic and don't want to do anything. Oh, it was just brilliant to watch. Okay, now I'm going to jump back to the very final set of interviews. This was actually a day before the release of the report that they had published to the entire products. So the report wasn't released, it was going to be released the second day. And so I got a group together and I said, started asking questions, what do you think about this? They all said it was an amazing thing, we really bonded with each other, we learned so much. I said, okay, so how was the expert sessions? And they would say, we learned so much that there was so many different versions of this thing around the world. It was just interesting. And I said, okay, how about the public consultations? He would say, we had no idea our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers knew so much about the subject. It was crazy. They did their homework before they came because they really wanted to challenge us. And they did. We really had, we even challenged what a lot of the experts said. Okay, cool. We really thought about it.
Wow.
You see, we don't have these environments in our society,
No.
right? We meet people, it's like, how's the weather?
And if you disagree with someone, it's like they get blocked.
Right to the wall of opinion.
Right, yeah. It's like, nobody is actually like nobody's listening to each other. Because you're stuck in your ideology. It's a religion, exactly. You're in your religion and you have the faith and that's it. And anything that goes against it is like, so how do you break into those people that have these walls like
That's
this?
what this does. All 160 of them were like this. And that was a beautiful cross-section of different people in the society. So technically it should apply to anyone who would have gone through this process. Maybe there's 1 or 2 that them may not if you polled enough people or pulled enough people. But the fact is, I've just never seen any process that had so much power to change people's viewpoints, their position, their thought processes. It was just stunning to watch, absolutely stunning.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I'm talking with them and I said, so what did you come up with? And they said, well, we can't tell you, it's in the report. You have to read the report with the rest of the province when it comes out tomorrow. I said, that's fine. It was just curious. Do you think you came to the best decision possible? And they said, well, it's partly debatable, and we really had some, really good, strong discussions. On the odd time we would get a little heated about it, but most of us really just wanted to get to the best answer possible. So we didn't really, it's not like Parliament where we're just, attacking each other on a regular basis. We're not trying to get votes. Our job is done. We just publish what we think it is, and we just see what the province thinks about it. So, okay, well, that's cool. Anyway, so I kept asking them more and more questions. Now, something happened that I didn't expect, never seen before in the previous interviews. And that was every once in a while, as I'm listing out some questions, every once in a while I would see a couple of the members look at each other. I thought, that's odd, that's never happened before. And I would ask more questions, and then another question would elicit another pair of eyes looking at each other. And that's bizarre. So I started targeting my questions, because I saw there was some overlap between the questions that would cause them to look at each other. So I started targeting the questions, and then more and more they would look at each other, and I'm going, okay, this is good. I don't know what this is. I gotta find out. So finally, I took my pad and paper and I just put it on the table, and I said, "Can I be a little blunt about something?" And they said, "Sure. What is it?" And I said, "I've been noticing that on some questions there's a bit of a hesitation, and I don't know what that is. Please tell me what that is." And now they all started looking at each other. Oh, this is going to be good. It's like, ooh, something's going on here. I need to know what it is. So, and I said that. I took my tape recorder and I pulled off the back, because you could do that at that time. You take the batteries, right? And I put the batteries on the table. I put the recorder on the table, and I said, look, batteries out. Like, I've been doing interviews with you guys for about a year now. So you know that I'm not going to say anything you don't want me to say, but I need to understand what's going on. Because this is important. And so now they're still all hesitant for a bit. Right? And finally, the person who was next to me kind of leans over a little bit. Right? Now everyone can hear him. It's not like conspiratorial. Mm-hmm. Everyone can hear him, but he says, "You know what we're called?" And I said, "Well, of course I know what you're called. I've been interviewing you guys for a whole year now, right? You're called the British Columbia Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform." See, the government held this process because they wanted people to decide whether they wanted to stay with first past the post, 51% votes, to elect somebody, or do you want to go to a different system that may balance out the votes better? So they studied STV, MMPT, and all these other different formats. They ultimately ended up choosing STV, single transferable vote, but it didn't matter, right? The idea was they felt they came to the best decision possible under that. And I said, yeah, you're called the British Columbia Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform. And then he leans over just a touch closer, and he says, "And we couldn't go past that mandate." I said, "Well, yeah, that was the question. You're going to pull together to answer that question." And he said, and there was a pause again, but again, said it openly. He said, "What we all realized while we went through this process and we were talking about all the different formats and stuff, we all realized that the system was the problem, and it's never going to get fixed with votes." Oh my fucking God. They got it. They totally got it. These are average everyday. If I went to any of them on the street before this process and I said, the system is broken and it can never be fixed.
like them
They
figuring it out.
figured it out by
Yeah.
themselves. You can't tell people that stuff, right? But if they discover it and they realize it, then they own it, right? So yeah, most of them would have said, "Oh, you're just some kind of crazy conspiracy guy." The other part would just say, "Well, yeah, but what can I do about it?" Right? But that was the brilliance. I've never seen anything that could get people to just really think about these issues so deeply. And that's why I've just dedicated myself to getting this out there as fast as possible, because I don't think we have a choice. We don't have anything else that I've ever seen that can actually get entire populations to become compliant in such a short period of time. And so that's the fun of that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very nice.
So I think that's pretty much it. There's just a couple of slides here. There. This is just an MVP that I threw together, so just to show how we could digitize this process. It
What
doesn't.
In what platform is that?
I did this one in a
Notion?
platform called Coda. I had started in Notion because a few people said,
Yeah.
Notion could be done, it could be used for that.
But it's not decentralized.
No, it's centralized, but again, it's just a demo, so I didn't really care. If communities want to use it, they can use it. Ultimately, I do want to design a whole decentralized platform for doing this, and we'll do that down the road. But I also realize that we're never going to really do this fast enough if we just put that out there and let people use it. It's going to take too long for adoption. So what I've realized is the only way we could really do this is that it's about the coordinators. It's about the people who can go into communities, say, what's your biggest problem? Okay, let's solve it. We're going to do this whole process. We'll walk you through that process, make sure it's all done properly, documented, get everybody to participate, all the rest of that, so that they can actually solve their own problems. And so in order to do that, I realized what we need is academies. We need to train these people as fast as possible. So the plan now is to put 2 academies on every single continent and subcontinent. And each academy will produce 30 coordinators every 2 months. And at the end of those 2 months, you're certified. Yeah, they're pre-qualified before they come in because you don't have enough time to teach them everything. So we make sure that they already understand how to do facilitation, because facilitation is a big part of this, being able to get people to talk to each other properly. So that's part of it, and the other part is it involves organization. And basically what these things are just extended conferences, right? You bring in speakers like the experts, you schedule people to go through these processes, and then you have breakout groups, which would be the deliberation process. This is all just one big conference over a few months. So the people we take in will already have facilitation experience and conference or running experience, so that we don't have to teach them that stuff.
Yeah.
All we teach them is just the process and what technologies they can apply if they're applicable to certain communities. So really that can be done in 2 months very easily. So we do a 2-month course, then we certify them, graduate them, then they go out into communities across their continent, and they say, what's your biggest issue? Let's run through this process and solve that issue. While they're doing that, they're teaching the locals how to do it, right? We're saying, this is how you schedule, this is how you do facilitation, and the rest of it. So that after a couple of sessions of doing that, solving a couple of issues, then the locals can continue that process on their own, and the originating coordinator can move on to another community while we're still graduating 30 every 2 months. That's how we go viral. So yeah, that's the plan.
Very nice.
Wow.
So there you go. Oh yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Execution, no?
Yeah, it's all about how you apply it. And I've always been about the practicality of it, right? That's cute. Nice. So there you go. And so our big first project is Tulum, because Tulum's going to use this to solve the last 20% of the debt-based monetary system, which is they are going to study design, tailor, implement their own community currency. By doing it as an entire community, they know
How do you get the whole community onboarded?
Well,
I mean,
the
like-
exact same process. Oh, you mean onboarded into
Like,
the
so let's
process?
talk about Tulum. How are you gonna get people from Inversión onboarded?
Right, so what we can't do is we can't communicate with 50,000 people directly
No.
right away. It's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
So what we have is a plan of approaching that through community influencers, right? Everybody in the community looks up to somebody, whether it be religious leaders, political leaders, mass media leaders, whatever, but there's always cultural leaders. There's always somebody that other people look up to. So what you gotta do is identify who they are, get them together and show them how this system works and get them to realize that this is not our process, this is their process. If they wanna tweak it, they can tweak it, I don't care. But I will tell them what the tweak will affect,
Yeah.
that's up to them, right? It's their process.
They wanna go properly, no?
Yeah, so I want them to just understand and take that information back to their communities and say, look, this is your process. This is going to really truly benefit the community if we come up with a good solution. And you get to vote on it, so you could reject it if you don't like it. But this is your process. So A, participate. B, stay on top of it. Stay aware of what's going on in that process. Watch it very closely. Because this comes from you and is for you. So once we get them on board, they'll go back to their communities who they already have lines of communications with, and will say, look, I trust it, it's worth doing, please stay involved. So that's how we do it. So we expect that there will be anywhere between about 120 and 150 community players here, yeah. We've already got a list of about 40 of them, and we're trying to do about 20 per week to flesh out the 120, 150, then get them all
What do you,
trained.
I mean, like, what is the incentivization, like, for them to do it? Like, 'cause
Knowledge,
you
no?
have-
So, well, hold
you
on,
have to
so.
get them over this hump of like, oh, this actually makes sense. And
Yes. So when it comes to the community influencers, I think the thing speaks for itself. Everybody I've ever talked to about this, doesn't matter who they are, they all end up understanding that this is for communities, by communities. So their incentive is A, they actually get to see solutions being done in their communities. Number two, they're the ones who go to their communities and promote this, so that reflects very well on them. To say, you can now exercise your power in your community, why wouldn't you want to do that? And so that gets them some more extra notoriety and trust from their community. So that's their main incentive for sure. Now the discovery group, they're incentivized, A, because they get to kind of, figure out and solve a problem that's a big issue for the community, because they live in that community, they certainly want to see a solution to that. Number two, they're actually paid to go through that process, right? We do pay them a stipend.
A bit.
So, I think that's important, because we pay our politicians to make mediocre decisions.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we pay our
Still
people to
money.
make really good, high quality decisions, right?
Yeah.
That's the important part. And that's where we're at.
Amazing.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Well, don't thank me until it's done. We gotta get that
Yeah.
whole process
Let's
done.
make
That's
things
key.
done with that.
So the key is, and for your audience as well, is get aware of this, be knowledgeable about it, and come and do something for it. If you're gonna be part of the coordination staff, if you can donate to the process, the Tulum group is accepting donations so that they can get it up to speed. We're having a couple of fundraising events. So the two things we have to do is we have to collect all the influencers and get them on board, and we also have to fund that first process. The beautiful thing is the process is deciding on a whole new currency for Tulum. So as soon as whoever donates to this can also get paid back right away in
Yeah.
local currency.
In the moment that it gets.
Yeah, so it's only a temporary loan until the currency gets established.
Yeah. People can't even get rich if
Exactly.
they get in free token sale.
Well, so it's not like a token sale,
No.
right? The way this
Well-
works in most communities is you actually just create the currency. to
Well,
fulfill
maybe
the
not a
task.
sale, maybe just incorporation, no? Hey,
Well,
I'm getting all
When
these tokens.
you get tokens for working for the community in some way.
Exactly.
Either being a
Yeah.
participant in this process or